Right here. This scene has been burned into my mind for as long as I can remember. The birth of Darth Vader. No real need for introduction when discussing the most iconic villain in cinema. The iconic lines,
I am your father.
the mere sound of Vader's breathing is as recognizable as it is terrifying. The metal demon of the Empire has been my favorite character since I was a little kid. It's Vader, big gap everyone else. And if you don't believe me,
You don't know the power of the dark side. My balls itch, and I cannot scratch.
I owned a backpack, a helmet, and crappy plastic saber, and one of the earliest and few memories from my childhood was when my teacher asked the typical, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And my answer was Darth, with an F, Vader. I saw the character as any kid would. Scary, evil, or just the coolest thing ever. At the time, I also remember the opinions of the prequel trilogy, explicitly my own mother telling me that she didn't feel like Vader needed a backstory. It ruined the mystery. I didn't have the ability to say what I thought and how I felt she was wrong, nor the bravery as the child of a Puerto Rican woman, but I never really agreed with that sentiment. Although now I could possibly understand the perspective of someone that knew this character longer than I had been alive. I love knowing more about this awesome villain and how he came to be. Thankfully, people over time have come to appreciate what movies 1 through 3 do with the Clone Wars, and more recently the Vader comics, and that's to explore the aspect of Vader we briefly saw in the original films. Not the all-imposing Sith Lord, but the depressing tragedy of a broken man, the bad influences, and more importantly the wrong choices and flaws that brought him there. The story of Anakin Skywalker. Fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering. The tale of Anakin is a complicated one that deals with the conflict within himself, as is the overall message of Star Wars. The conflict between the light and the dark side, and through films 1, 2, and 3, we can see the downfall of the Chosen One. I view films 1 and 2 as yes, their own films, but I think they were heavily made with the intention of building up for Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. In The Phantom Menace, we see a slave boy from Tatooine, separated from his beloved mother and brought to the Jedi Order. However, the Council made a mistake in taking in a boy that they would never fully accept, but believed him to possibly be the Chosen One, and so they did it anyway. There is a lot of uncertainty with Anakin. He's sweet and talented and cares for others, but the seeds of his fear to leave his mother behind are important to keep in mind. He is clearly an emotional, expressive kid, and under the tutelage of Qui-Gon, one could wonder what his future would have been like. But unfortunately, he was killed in the battle against Darth Maul and left in the hands of Obi-Wan Kenobi. The first film, along with the grander picture of setting the current conflict in politics, plants the seeds and introduces us to Anakin Skywalker's character. It establishes the most important relationship to him at the moment in this film being his mother, and the beginning of what would be one of the, if not the most important relationship to Anakin for the rest of his life. Padme, making the audience from the start incredibly sympathetic to his situation, and leaving us wondering how could this innocent child become a ruthless Sith. Attack of the Clones spends a lot more time with Anakin. At this point, several years have passed, and we see a real start of conflict within what we learn to be an emotional young man, with no real guidance that seems to help him much during this time. During his time away from Padme, he's clearly thought about her. Strong emotions have been building up. Circumstances in the film put Anakin even closer to Padme, which only causes these emotions to grow more and more. I frequently heard criticism for the dialogue in this film, and while some of it I do understand and agree with, I think the film did a great job of portraying a young man in an order that teaches him to control certain feelings for how dangerous they can be, and can't help but feel the way he does. Is the dialogue the most realistic per se? No, but it's something more important, which is appropriate for the character of Anakin Skywalker. Amidst the romantic relationship between Padme and Anakin, there is a scene where they debate about how things should be carried out. Here we see Anakin's distrust with the way things are, and understandably so. He was a slave boy. Why would he be okay with the powers and the way that they currently are, if from his point of view it gets nothing done, or at least not as quickly as he would like? He suggests that if people can't agree, then they should be made to, and when she points out it sounds like a dictatorship, he says, well, if it works. Keep this in mind. Throughout this touching of hearts and hating of sand, he also has visions of his mother, and his fear of possibly losing her is too much, and he has to go and see what's happening, even if it means putting his current mission, which is to protect Padme, at risk. Here is where a massive turning point for Anakin begins, and a look inside the inner conflict of his character. and what could be seen as his true initial descent into the dark side. When Anakin's mother dies in his arms is where we see his fear turn into anger, and because of this anger he lashes out and slaughters them, like animals. And not just the men, but the women and the children. Here one can fully understand Anakin's sentiments, as most of us would have felt the same type of anger, but it being relatable and his actions being justifiable are two very different things. And it's not just the action Anakin takes here that is very telling, but the moment where Padme says, "You're not all powerful, Annie," Anakin responds,
"Well, I should be.
Someday I will be. I will be the most powerful Jedi ever." Here lies one of the components of a tragic story, the character's flaw, the things about themselves that would eventually lead to their downfall. The purpose of this scene, along with others down the line, isn't just to show that Anakin's emotional, but it's to show us the clear flaw to the audience and the dangerous line Anakin is beginning to walk. But what is Anakin's tragic flaw? The discussion around Anakin's character and his tragedy, I feel, is always a conversation mainly surrounded by the external things that placed him in an unfortunate situation. His early life as a slave, him being a Jedi which could have made him feel restricted because of the expectations, the ways the Jedi Council and the Jedi were wrong, quote unquote, and yes, while I do think they could be faulted and criticized for certain things, I think the issue that arises is the story has done such an amazing job of looking at Anakin's circumstances and making us empathetic or sympathetic towards his character that we then don't look at the tragic flaw of Anakin Skywalker. Anakin cannot let go. You see, there's a reason the Jedi wouldn't have been in favor of the relationship between Anakin and Padme, especially considering how volatile Anakin is as a person. The issue isn't love, as Obi-Wan himself states that he loved Anakin as a brother. The issue is selfish attachment. What could start off as a pure relationship can turn into one based in possessiveness, the selfish instinct to want something and be willing to do whatever it takes to have it or keep it. I was thinking of leaving this for the end of the video once I laid out Anakin's key actions in the Clone Wars and Revenge of the Sith, but I think by pointing this out here, I think it can put these things into a very different perspective, or at least really pinpoint exactly where Anakin himself went wrong. His reason for lashing out after his mother was killed, and the things that would lead to his downfall is Anakin's selfish inability to let go. And if you don't want to hear it from me, well, here's what George Lucas had to say about the character. Quote, "The fact that everything must change and that things come and go through his life and that he cannot hold on to things, which is a basic Jedi philosophy that he isn't willing to accept emotionally, and the reason that is because he was raised by his mother rather than the Jedi. If he'd been taken in his first years and started to study to be a Jedi, he wouldn't have had this particular connection as strong as it is, and he'd have been trained to love people, but not to become attached to them. Because he becomes attached to his mother, and he will become attached to Padme, and these things are, for a Jedi who needs to have a clear mind and not be influenced by threats to their attachments, a dangerous situation. And it feeds into fear of losing things, which feeds into greed, wanting to keep things, wanting to keep his possessions and things that he should be letting go of. His fear of losing her turns into anger at losing her, which ultimately turns to revenge and wiping out the village. He's greedy in that he wants to keep his mother around. He's greedy in that he wants to become more powerful in order to control things, in order to keep the things around that he wants. There's a lot of connections here with the beginning of him sliding into the dark side. The thing about Anakin is, Anakin started out as a nice kid. He was kind and sweet and lovely, and he was then trained as a Jedi, but Jedi can't be selfish. They can love, but they can't love people to the point of possession. You can't really possess somebody because people are free. It's possession that causes a lot of trouble, and that causes people to kill people and causes people to be bad. Ultimately, it has to do with being unwilling to give things up." End quote. With this in mind, a lot of what Anakin does and says in the Clone Wars at times, and especially in Revenge of the Sith, all becomes much clearer. Now, I myself want to clarify. Anakin, just like with any great character that has a downfall, has tremendous qualities that anyone would like to have. He's intelligent, brave, driven, ambitious, and a lot of other things, and he is a sweet and compassionate person as well. So no way I'm trying to paint Anakin as a one-dimensionally selfish person, but if anything, it's his extremely relatable flaw that makes him such an easy character to connect to emotionally and adds this facet of complexity to the character Vader that cannot be overlooked. It's the fine line of love and the slippery slope that it can be with possessive attachment. Anakin is willing to do whatever it takes, even if it means endangering others for the people he cares about, or using methods that go against the Jedi way, saving Ahsoka while endangering the greater good being the lives of countless children, feeding into his anger and using brute force and interrogations, being unwilling to move on from his past. There are countless instances where Anakin resorts to using power to get what he wants throughout the Clone Wars, and is also aware of this mistake in the struggle within himself. Quote, "Letting go of our attachments is a difficult struggle for all of us," something Anakin himself says. This inner conflict reaches its boiling point in Revenge of the Sith, as Palpatine's manipulation and brilliant planning found a perfect way to slowly implement doubts in the mind and heart of Anakin, using fear to cloud his judgment of the Jedi Council, praising him and being like the father he never had, while the Jedi Council and their decisions, while understandable, don't help at all. If anything, it only fuels the insecurity within Anakin, and although not making Anakin a master could have been seen as a sign of disrespect, I think it's also important to point out that they still allow him to be on the council, and no one as young as him is ever given that privilege. From Anakin's point of view, nonetheless, being the hero of the Clone Wars along with Kenobi and not being granted the rank of master could be seen as an error from the council, but I would argue their bigger mistake was playing right into Palpatine's hands, by using Anakin to spy on him, only adding more to his doubts about the council and their decisions. More specifically, their disapproval of Palpatine and their worry that he is gaining too much power in the Senate, and that he will not be willing to give it up when it's all over. Once again, Anakin's belief that it isn't really a problem as long as it allows for more action to be taken instead of talking and debating and hindering the process more than it already has been. Remember what I said earlier about Anakin saying, well, if it works, continue to keep that in mind. To add on top of all of this, they're getting desperate to end the war, and Anakin has just learned now his beloved wife Padme is pregnant. Now Anakin, someone who had struggled to let go of his fear, his anger, which has turned into hatred against those that stand in his way at moments, has even more to lose as he begins to have premonitions of Padme's death, just like he did with his mother. I think there are some incredibly important scenes that before completely went over my head, like when Padme says Anakin is blinded by love. I thought this was just a big romantic scene, but there's far more meaning in saying that he has been blinded by love and that it's possibly true. Then the scene where Yoda tells Anakin to be careful about his feelings. Before, I saw this scene as Yoda not being much of any help, but in reality he was completely right. Anakin is simply incapable of doing the thing that he should, understanding that death is a part of life. He hits the nail on the head at the real issue Anakin has. Quote, "Attachment leads to jealousy, the shadow of greed that is. Train yourself to let go of everything you fear to lose." But in the meantime, the serpent whispers in his ear. Palpatine tells Anakin that through the dark side and through the story of Darth Plagueis, he tells him that he can save the ones he loves from death, something that is unnatural. Here we have something I've talked about in previous videos, and that is the character's want versus their need. The want is what the character desires and believes to be the key to their happiness. For Anakin, that is saving Padme's life, but his need as a character is to let go. Understand that if she were to die, that is a part of life, and that he cannot be selfish in his desire to do whatever it takes to stop it. Anakin is aware of this when he says, "I'm not the Jedi I should be. I want more, but I shouldn't." However, the tale of the tragic character is one who cannot let go of his want, and instead clings onto it as the anchor drags him down to a fate he cannot escape from. The moment where Palpatine reveals himself as a Sith, Anakin does the right thing and reports it, and I think Mace Windu's decision in telling Anakin to stay was a very wise one. Imagine how things would have turned out if Anakin had done as he was told, but he didn't. He couldn't because in his mind and heart, saving the love of his life was more important than bringing an end to the Force that was truly at fault for everything up to this point. I used to look at the scene where Windu gains the upper hand against Palpatine, and for a moment think Anakin has a point. His whole life he's been criticized for not doing things the Jedi way all the time, and here Windu is about to go against the Jedi way to bring down Palpatine. But I think that was me allowing my sympathy for Anakin as a character to cloud the reality of his actions, and more importantly, his intentions. Palpatine, the man who is currently a powerhouse in the political world, would win a trial. He is the one responsible for everything in the Clone Wars to a certain extent. Earlier in the film, he debates killing Dooku because it isn't the Jedi way, but he does so anyways because it's what he wants. Revenge. Many other times, Anakin was willing to go against the Jedi way because it was most convenient for him and what he wanted. So now, is he saying Palpatine must stand trial because it's the right thing? No. The words he says right before cutting off Windu's hand is, "I need him." Not that Padme needs him, I need him. Anakin saved the life of the most dangerous man in the galaxy to get what he wants. and now has no other choice but to continue down this path. This is the conception, if you will, of Darth Vader. Anakin now is fully giving into his hatred and will do whatever it takes to stop this war and save Padme's life, even if it means wiping out the Jedi Order, and not just the men, but the women and the children. He commits atrocious acts under the false name of peace and under the misconception he is telling himself that he's doing this for Padme. To add even more to the tragedy, Anakin is given a lifeline, a final chance to return and run away from all of this. When Padme finds Anakin on Mustafar, she tells him to leave all this behind, but Anakin says he won't lose her, and that he can become more powerful than the Chancellor, overthrow him and rule the galaxy. Now she sees not the Anakin she fell in love with, but an Anakin consumed by his greed, lust for power. I cry every time I see this scene. The road he took to avoid his destiny is the road that leads him straight to it. There's actually a section from the Revenge of the Sith novel that perfectly puts all of this into perspective, but I want to save it for just a moment longer. I know it isn't technically canon, but look, I'm willing to trade this and everything related to Revan and some of the other books for films 7, 8, and 9. Sounds good? Okay, great. In his anger, he chokes her out, calling her a traitor. The very woman he quote-unquote did all of this for, so he thought. His desire to keep Padme, to hold her as tight as he could, prompts him to throw everything else away just because he couldn't let go. His love had corrupted into a greed-fueled possessiveness, suffocating, as if he was choking her. Obi-Wan now has no choice but to bring a stop to his apprentice, his friend, his brother. Anakin tries to blame Obi-Wan, saying he turned her against him, when in reality, it was his own greed and lust for power that did that. The latter half of this film paints the picture of the extent Anakin was willing to go to, the fine line he had walked and the trap he had walked right into, the seeds of doubt and fear that grew into anger and hatred as he clashes with Obi-Wan, and in the ultimate act of arrogance in his own power, once again he is struck down, as a broken-hearted Obi-Wan leaves Anakin to burn to death. But no, death would be too easy for Anakin. His fate, his punishment, would be far, far worse. You see, before as a kid I saw this scene and got goosebumps from how cool it was. Finally, we see the birth of Darth Vader, but now I want to take this piece from the novel I brought up earlier and really paint the picture of Anakin's tragedy. This is how it feels to be Anakin Skywalker forever. The first dawn of light in your universe brings you pain. The light burns you. It will always burn you. Part of you will always lie upon black glass sand beside a lake of fire while flames chew at your flesh. You can hear yourself breathing. It comes hard and harsh and it scrapes nerves already raw, but you cannot stop it. You can never stop it. You cannot even slow it down. You don't even have lungs anymore. Mechanisms hardwired into your chest breathe for you. They will pump oxygen into your bloodstream forever. Lord Vader, can you hear me? And you can't. Not in the way you once did. Sensors in the shell that prisons your head trickle meaning into your brain. You open your scorched pale eyes. Optical sensors integrate light and shadow into a hideous simulacrum of the world around you. Or perhaps the simulacrum is perfect, and it is the world that is hideous. Padme, are you here? Are you alright? You try to say, but another voice speaks for you, out from the vocabulator that serves you for burned away lips and tongue and throat. Padme, are you here? Are you alright? I'm very sorry, Lord Vader. I'm afraid she died. It seems in your anger, you killed her. This burns hotter than the lava had. No, it is not possible. You loved her. You've always loved her. You can never will her death. Never. But you remember all of it. You remember the dragon that you brought Vader forth from your heart to slay. You remember the cold venom in Vader's blood. You remember the furnace of Vader's fury and the black hatred of seizing her throat to silence her lying mouth. And there is one blazing moment in which you finally understand. There was no dragon. That there was no Vader. That there was only you. Only Anakin Skywalker. That it was all you. Is you. Only you. You did it. You killed her. You killed her because finally when you could have saved her, when you could have gone away with her, you could have been thinking about her, you were thinking about yourself. It is in this blazing moment that you finally understand the trap of the dark side, the final cruelty of the Sith. Because now yourself is all you will ever have. and you rage and you scream and you reach through the Force to crush the shadow who's destroyed you, but you were so far less now than what you were. You were more than half a machine. You were like a painter gone blind, a composer gone deaf. You can remember where the power was, but the power you can touch is only a memory, and so with all your world-destroying fury, it is only droids around you that implode, and equipment, and the table on which you were strapped shatters, and in the end, you cannot touch the shadow. In the end, you do not even want to. In the end, the shadow is all you have left. Because the shadow understands you. The shadow forgives you. The shadow gathers you unto itself. And within your furnace heart, you burn in your own flame. This is how it feels to be Anakin Skywalker. Forever. I was able to realize this along with my crush for Natalie Portman again, and that's his love turned into an attachment that he was willing to do anything to preserve. Not for Padme, but because he didn't want to feel that pain. He didn't want to face the pain that will always occur in life, as loss or death is a natural part of life. As George Lucas says, quote, because the pain of losing somebody or something is your pain. It's not the pain of that person. It's your pain of losing that person being with you, and you have to overcome that or else you will be suffering your whole life, end quote. Yes, Anakin had a sad and unfortunate life, but he had moments where he could have made a choice and chose himself. Before, I saw the suit as the coolest thing ever, but for Anakin, it is a metal coffin, a torture chamber. His breathing keeps him up at night, and it is full of imperfections, designed to fuel his anger, his hatred, and most importantly, his suffering. The Vader comics expand upon this inner suffering, where Vader gets his lightsaber, fully accepting that he's a monster, and pours his hatred into the Kyber crystal, getting visions of what could have been, and ultimately having to accept the decision he made and the life he is now stuck with. What fuels his hatred now is a deep burning hatred, but for himself. Here I'm referring to the 2017 Vader comics run, where we see Vader at length in what he does after Revenge of the Sith, literally right after the movie ends, but it's issue number 25, being a legitimate masterpiece of visual storytelling. We see the spirit of Anakin, Vader, walking through his life, the hand of Palpatine manipulating even his birth, it seems, and when a young Annie is attacked by a shadow, by Vader, we then see him wake up from the nightmare, and then begin to walk through his past, his training, his love with Padme, his time fighting alongside and against Ahsoka. Confronted by all the Jedi, he kills them all, one by one, because he needs to let the past die, even if he himself has to kill it. He then watches Palpatine kill Obi-Wan, as he himself then strikes down the Emperor, only after he encounters the person he holds most dear, Padme once again. He is now in human form, and ironically, he calls out saying he can save her, save them both. She tells him she doesn't know who he is. Anakin Skywalker is dead. With Padme falling off the balcony, once again Anakin shows who he truly is, saying, I won't let you go. A lightning bolt strikes Padme, a symbol of his hatred which killed her. Anakin now, in his spiritual form, screams no again, as when he took his first steps in his robotic sarcophagus. A light then appears in the distance of the ruins, and from the light we see what would be Luke. He was a slave as a boy, and because of his selfish choices, he is now more of a slave than ever before, a slave to the Sith. He had a chance, Padme told him. All she needed was his love, but as he said, love won't save you. The irony is love would be the very thing that would save Vader. On the horizon, while he enforces his power on the galaxy, a new hope exists in Luke Skywalker. The Obi-Wan series shows us even more how far Anakin has fallen into the dark side, and I think we can all agree the Vader scenes were the highlight of the show, and his interactions with Obi-Wan especially was a heartbreaking show of Anakin's fall. Obi-Wan himself felt responsible, apologizing to Anakin for failing him, as he said in Revenge of the Sith, but now he says he's sorry, but for all of it. When Vader earlier was crushing him with the boulders, I think that act was showing us the guilt of Obi-Wan, and how he felt that Anakin was his failure. If not, Vader was the symbol of his greatest failure now physically being in front of him, but Obi-Wan rises from the pit and fights, overpowering Vader and slashing his helmet open. Similar to how Ahsoka, when fighting Vader in Rebels, it slashed the other side of his helmet open. The powerful Darth Vader, when damaged like this, allows us to see him physically vulnerable, his weak breathing, reminding us of his painful limitations. And when Obi-Wan apologizes to Anakin, seeing the scarred head underneath the helmet, Anakin tells him,
I am not your failure, Obi-Wan.
Faint blue glow appeared on his face, only for an evil smile to form through the opening in the helmet.
You didn't kill Anakin Skywalker. I did.
as a red glow forms on his face, showing Obi-Wan that the brother he had is truly gone. What was once a young man full of life and wonder, a sweet, caring individual that fought for peace and protected his loved ones, is now a man consumed by his hatred and suffering, a ruthless force that wishes to destroy all that oppresses him. He is truly now everything he swore to destroy. But this would not be the last time Obi-Wan and Vader face off. Time passes as our attention is shifted to Vader's son, Luke Skywalker, who slowly learns about his father. Ben Kenobi tells Luke that his father was a powerful Jedi, killed by Darth Vader. His description of Anakin as a cunning warrior and a good friend is hard to sit through and not feel an immense sadness. Later, the two are on a mission along with Han Solo and Chewbacca to rescue Princess Leia and return to tell the rebels of the plans the Empire has with the Death Star. Luke would witness the final clash between what was once master and apprentice, brothers, but now Vader has become the master. Anakin is 9 years old when we first meet him, he is 19 when we witness his relationship with Padme, and is 22 when he succumbs to the dark side, kills Padme, and becomes Darth Vader. Nearly 20 years have passed since that fateful day on Mustafar, and I think it's incredibly impressive how George Lucas and others behind the story of Star Wars were capable of retroactively adding so much to the character of Darth Vader, seeing how vastly different the person Vader once was, and creating a believable downfall that humanizes what was once simply a brute force of nature shrouded in mystery. This confrontation specifically leaves the audience in wonder as to the history between these two, and now we fully know the heartbreaking tale. Luke witnesses the death of Ben Kenobi, and the rest is history with the destruction of the Death Star, but this would just be the beginning of the conflict between Luke and Vader. The Empire Strikes Back is where the dynamic between Luke and Vader took a turn that would be one of the most iconic twists ever, if not the most iconic. The foundation, if you will, that would allow for the franchise to then give us pieces of what was the true story behind Vader. There is a scene specifically that I want to point to before all that though, a small semblance of the good that Padme believed was still in him, but couldn't finish those words a second time before she died. Palpatine tells Vader that the rebel that destroyed the Death Star is the offspring of Anakin Skywalker. This is something that I believe Vader already clearly knew, given the context we're given at the beginning of the film of his obsessive search for Luke Skywalker, and throughout this scene, it really seems like Vader first tries to deny it in order to protect Luke, then afterwards says he's no threat without Obi-Wan, and finally brings about the idea of turning Luke to the dark side. Here I think we see a small bit of humanity. Even if it is the same selfish demonstration of affection that caused his downfall, he isn't 100% a brutal killing machine. Here, he begins his plan to turn Luke and as well as overthrow Palpatine. With all this in context, we can now look at what could be considered the most iconic scene in cinema. The moment where Vader has Luke cornered, cuts his hand off, and offers him to join the dark side, complete his training and overthrow the Emperor, as we all know. Obi-Wan never told you, and Luke retorts saying that he was told enough, that Vader had killed him, and that's when the bomb of truth hits. The ultimate plot twist. Luke had believed Vader killed his father, and he did, but not in the literal sense he had been led to believe. There was no Vader, there was only Anakin Skywalker. Only him. He did it. He was the one responsible for it all. Luke escapes and now has to live with the reality as well as the inner conflict of his own father being a Sith, along with the temptation of giving in to the dark side. Vader desires to finally overthrow Palpatine and get his revenge for what he had done. But even if this is an understandable desire, it still doesn't take away from the wrong motives he still has behind it. In Return of the Jedi, we finally see the story of Vader come full circle. Luke is being pushed and tempted further and further to give into the dark side, similar to how his father had been, although under very different circumstances. I think the fight between Luke and Vader has a very similar feel to the Anakin versus Dooku fight. Dooku, in a way, was to Anakin what now Vader is to Luke, an obstacle, a force so powerful that it tempts them to tap into the dark side, to give in. A test put there by Darth Sidious into converting them into his replacement for his previous apprentice. A conflict of whether to give in to those feelings of fear, anger, hatred. In Revenge of the Sith, we see a conflict with Anakin, especially as he had Dooku at his mercy, one red saber and one blue. Here now fighting his son Luke, there's once again this conflict. Your thoughts betray you, Father. I feel the good in you. The conflict. Vader tries to deny it, saying there is no conflict. The two continue to fight and Luke taps into his aggression, and as he gains an advantage, or should I say the upper hand, my apologies, and defeats Vader. Now he has the same choice his father did long ago, but where Anakin failed, Luke succeeded, not going all the way and giving in to the dark side. Throughout it all, despite what Vader had done, Luke still saw the good in him, the good that Padme still believed was there, despite what Anakin had just done to her. Palpatine then tries to electrocute Luke to death as Vader watches. He sees the same thing repeating all over again, and just like before, he has a choice. Despite trying to deny it, there is a strong conflict within Anakin once again, but this time, he makes the right choice by stopping Palpatine and throwing him to his death. You see, before his plans were one still based in a selfish desire to rule the galaxy with his son, but here, because of Luke's love towards his father, his belief that there was still good inside of Anakin, that Anakin was able to make a choice based on love, even if it costed his own life. He would not make the same mistake again. Luke carries Anakin, who struggles to breathe because of the electricity that had damaged his suit, and in his final request, Anakin wants his mask removed, the permanent symbol of his mistake, his fall, the final piece of the tortured life he had lived in that suit, knowing that he doesn't have long to live. Just for once, let me look on you with my own eyes. Anakin now finally sees his son and tells him to leave. Luke told him that he couldn't, that he needed to save him, and this is where it all truly comes full circle, where Anakin says, "You already have, Luke. You were right. You were right about me. Tell your sister you were right." Luke was right about him just as Padme was. The irony, as I mentioned earlier, Anakin saying that love wouldn't save Padme, but it was love that saved Anakin. The Chosen One had truly brought balance to the Force, finally making the right choice for himself in a selfless act of love. Anger, hatred, that fear of letting go had imprisoned him, but selfless love had set him free from the mask of Vader. It was love that then redeemed Anakin Skywalker. A story spanning over 30 years, a tragic and beautiful tale of the fall and redemption of the Chosen One. The only way that this could be tainted in any way, shape, or form would be if Palpatine somehow returned, but that would never happen.